Today is Wednesday, January 8th, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. Trump speaks out against ongoing lawfare. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. You can email us as well, quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. Joining me now to get through the news of the cray, as we do each and every weekday, bright and early, CBN's Billy Hallowell and Trey Goins-Phillips. Glad you're all here with us. A lot to get to, as always. On the focus story, we've got Mark Zuckerberg here doing a 180 on free speech and fact checkers.
Yeah, this is a pretty wild story. Facebook is suddenly going to be all about anti-censorship, so we'll get into that today.
A big change. We'll talk about it. On the main thing, Trey, we're taking a look at how we can approach dating from a godly perspective.
Yeah, we caught up with J.P. DeGance, not to be confused with J.D. Vance, from the ministry Communio, and we talked about how to date from a Christian perspective. So it was an interesting conversation.
All right, looking forward to that. Certainly, and I mean, in this day and age with all kinds of dating apps, all kinds of crazy things, ways to date, it's certainly going to be helpful information. Looking forward to that. Coming up on the main thing. Make sure you subscribe to all of our CBN News podcasts. We got DC Debrief with John Stolness, Billy's Newsmakers podcast. You can find the links to both of those in the description of this podcast episode, as well as Jesus and the Prophecies of Christmas, our 4-part series that we did leading up to Christmas. Make sure you are subscribed to that as well. All right, and with that, we are going to head over to the news in 90 seconds. President-elect Donald Trump criticized ongoing legal battles against him during his first remarks since Congress certified his 2024 victory, calling the cases lawfare and accusing the justice system of being weaponized. Speaking at Mar-a-Lago, Trump denounced special counsel Jack Smith and New York Judge Juan Merchan, claiming they were part of politically motivated efforts to derail his campaign. Legal tensions continue as Merchan, the judge, scheduled Trump's sentencing for January 10th, just days before his inauguration, and Trump's team attempted to stay the decision, but it was denied by the judge. And Trump's comments here signal his focus on uniting the base and countering what he calls unjustified legal attacks as he prepares to be inaugurated on January 20th. And former President Jimmy Carter's casket arrived at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland. He'll soon lie in state at the U.S. Capitol Rotunda, open to the public through Thursday. Carter, the 39th president and the first to reach 100 years old, is remembered for not really having great policy success, but being a man of faith. Those are just some of today's top headlines. You can check out those stories over at cbnnews.com. So, Trump spoke out here. You know, if there was any wondering, guys, if President-elect Trump was going to be sort of tamer or maybe having this toned down version this time around, I think he dispelled any of those myths at this first press conference yesterday because, I mean, he took questions. He was happy to take them all, but he was not happy with these ongoing cases. And another thing, by the way, I didn't get to mention this, but entertaining as always, he's talking about a whole bunch of things, but he did say that he was going to impose very serious tariffs on Canada and Mexico. And he vowed to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, which he said has a, quote, beautiful ring to it. So Trump is back, and it's going to be, I think, entertaining as always.
I didn't realize how much I missed these press conferences until today or until yesterday. I mean,
yeah,
as I was watching and thinking, oh, here we are again. It feels like just yesterday we had these for 4 years, but no.
Well, and Billy, I mean, not to interrupt, but just to add to your point real quick, and you can continue. The press just can't help themselves. So Trump says things, and he's just being himself, and he's entertaining, et cetera. But then the press cannot help themselves, and they just take it a step farther. And then it just continues. It's just this cycle that they keep getting into. They cannot help themselves with him, but I digress.
He's doing it on purpose. I mean,
Yeah.
this is what he does. He says things, and I think, I mean, we saw this even during the debates with some of the outlandish things he said. I think sometimes there's a method to the madness of what is being said and done, whether it's to just rattle somebody's cages or, I think in the case of Canada and Mexico, he did rattle their cages. He had Trudeau flying all the way down to Florida to meet with him before he was even president, right? I mean, so I think there's an effect to it that people can take it or leave it, love it or hate it, but he's doing it on purpose, I think.
I am really just excited for the sequel. I think these next 4 years, season two is going to be, I think, more fun than season one, which is hard to believe with Donald Trump, right? He's a reality TV star, and I think even before he is, inaugurated again as president, I think we're seeing just some of that played out. That he just knows how to poke at people. He knows how to get under people's skin, and I think some of that is potentially to his advantage, right? I think some of that strategy that he learned from television, honestly, could be useful for him because a lot of times, more than anything, the president has the bully pulpit, and I think he has a way of influencing and changing culture, and he can obviously wield that in negative ways, but he can also use that for positive.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, one last parting question here before we move on to the focus story. Are we going to have to trade in all of our globes and maps that we have hanging on the wall? Is he renaming this? How do you even get the Gulf of Mexico renamed to the Gulf of America other than just start calling it that?
I think
Printing your own map?
do it.
Yeah. Hey,
They did it with the Tappan Zee Bridge in New York here. That's the Mario Cuomo Bridge. So we could just rename
I'm
the
telling
bridge.
you,
Did Andrew Cuomo go out there and paint that thing on the bridge himself? I mean, how did that happen?
No, they just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxpayer money to rename it after his father. Anyway.
Well, the one thing I'll say, Dan, is in 2025, we're able to do far more than just rename the Gulf of Mexico. We can change our sex if we want to. So
That's true.
Renaming it from the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America that's child's play in comparison
that's
to
true.
what we do with
That's true.
with
And
sexuality.
how dare we assume that body of water identifies with Mexico?
That
it's
is so
always
true.
probably identified with America. Let's just be honest about it. So, all right, let's, man, 2025 is going to be lit. It already is. So here we go. Let's head on over to the focus story now. And man, social media giant Meta, which I'm cards up on the table. I hate that name. I hate it. It's a horrible name. So I just can't even pretend to read it with a straight face when I see it. So anyway, the guys at Facebook, they shocked the tech industry Tuesday by announcing the company will be taking steps to restore free expression. What's going on here?
Yeah, this is wild. Mark Zuckerberg and the company announcing that they're going to be doing a series of things. Let me just read a quote because this will kind of lead us into it. Mark Zuckerberg said, after Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote nonstop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. He then went on to say that his company, as a result of that, tried to address these concerns without becoming the, quote, arbiters of truth. Then he continued and said, but the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US. So basically, as a result of apparently this sudden recognition that coincides with a new president, they have decided that at Meta, they are going to phase out fact checkers. They're going to fire them, and they're going to use a more comprehensive community notes system. This is a system that is similar to what Elon Musk has implemented on X, formerly known as Twitter, where there'll be community notes on posts rather than having these hired fact checkers that are biased and go after one side more than the other. And I'm not just saying this from opinion. This is what Mark Zuckerberg himself admitted to in a video statement that accompanied this public proclamation about their plans. And so that gives you a little bit of a background, pretty big changes. And he did say, look, there's going to be more objectionable content, things that are now up that wouldn't have been before as a result of this. But it seems like they want to err more on the side of free speech.
Yeah, and obviously these statements made a big splash in the media. It was front page news here for, the last day or two. So there's been a lot of reaction to it. What are critics, analysts, experts, just onlookers, what are they all saying about this?
Yeah, so I actually spoke with Jacob Hubert. He's the president of the Liberty Justice Center. It's a law firm that protects the First Amendment, and he has been at the center, this particular lawyer, of a lot of these social media battles. In fact, his law firm is tackling this TikTok ban. They are trying to stop the ban on TikTok. So we talked a little bit about that, but we spoke mostly about what he thinks is going on here. He said it seems like we're at the end of an era as the Biden administration is coming to a close. He said that this sort of heavy-handed government effort to censor content on social media, he believes that this is going to be stopping now, that we're watching this sort of die. And obviously it started with X, with Elon Musk coming in. Now we're seeing this happen with Zuckerberg and with Meta. And, look, he cited some examples. He talked about the Hunter Biden laptop story. He talked about COVID-19. These were examples of people being punished for asking questions, right? They were being punished on social media for asking about, the lab leak theory or different elements of pandemic related responses. And so he said, look, the Biden administration was pressuring Facebook and other companies to censor content, that anything that went against the government narrative. And he believes we're seeing the end of that now.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly is a stunning change around compared to where they were 4 or 5 years ago. Like these examples you listed off, Billy, we all remember just shocking forms of censorship when you were the least free to speak on Twitter at the time and Facebook, which was really frustrating to so many, particularly conservatives and Christians. But what's behind it? What are some of the reasons, the other reasons for Zuckerberg's sudden about face here?
Yeah, it's interesting. A couple of elements as we're answering that question, too. In that Zuckerberg statement, he talked about very specific things, obviously stopping the censorship, righting the ship. But he even said, we're going to work with President Trump, that Facebook is going to work with them to crack down on free speech restrictions that are targeting American companies in other countries. So he's going to be working with Trump outside of the U.S. to protect American companies, which I thought was interesting. But basically, Hubert said that he thinks a lot of these changes were brought about because of Elon Musk and what he did. Facebook is probably looking to replicate some of that because there's a belief that it's actually helped create more audience on X, that more people are going over there because they're not going to be restricted in what they could say, and that Mark Zuckerberg wants to have that same dynamic at Facebook. He also said there's market pressure as a result of that what we're watching right now is with this reemergence of Trump and the election, we're seeing that, look, he realizes, Zuckerberg, that government pressure is going to go away. According to Huber, Trump is much more pro-free speech when it comes to the internet, and that with Zuckerberg realizing that, it'll be easier to work with Trump by sort of coming alongside what Trump wants him to do, which is to be more open. And I would say this is interesting because Zuckerberg did note in his statement that the election seemed to indicate that there's going to be a newfound elevation of free speech again. And I thought that was an interesting admission, that the election sent a sign that people wanted more of Trump's vision, not Biden's vision, not this government restriction and push. And so all of these things really, he believes, were pushing Zuckerberg towards this reality of being more open and honest with allowing different viewpoints.
Yeah, and I think we're not kidding anyone here, right? Nobody's really being fooled by quote unquote fact checkers and misinformation, harmful misinformation. What's happening there is plain and obvious, right? It is left-wing arbiters here trying to suppress things they don't like. Why do we think all of the incidents were at the hands of conservatives and Christians being suppressed for things that they were saying? I mean, when you make the CDC the arbiter of truth during COVID, and anything you say to disagree with them has is being suppressed and deleted. I mean, it was just absurd. And yet they went along with it. They did not have a backbone at the time. The former owners of Twitter and Zuckerberg did not have a backbone at all during that. And hopefully this is a genuine turn and they're actually realizing that, hey, maybe we shouldn't alienate half of the country, and now actually more than half of the country, at least from the voting bloc, since more people voted for Trump this time around than for the Democrats. So it's basic common sense. I thought, after 2020 with the riots and all of the George Floyd stuff, when the companies all started caving to left-wing demands, I thought eventually that we'd get out of that, right? Because companies, at the end of the day, are about the bottom line. They need to make revenue. And if you alienate more than 50% of the country, that's just bad business. And so maybe we're finally seeing the pendulum swing back.
Some of this is just interesting in light of the shift, or, well, I don't know if it's a shift in
Right.
political perspective, but what has happened with Mark Zuckerberg himself. I think we've gone from seeing him as more outspokenly kind of the left to deciding I'm not going to talk about politics at all, but I'm still behind the scenes kind of leftist, to now he's being really kind of hands off completely. And it comes, obviously several months after he said in much more colorful language than this, that the way Trump reacted to the assassination attempt was really impressive, right? When he
Right.
stood back up and pumped his fist in the air, which was kind of an interesting thing for somebody who decided, I'm not going to make any political statements. And the only political statement he made was one that was praising Donald Trump. Now, maybe he was just trying to be unifying and it was nothing more than that. But I think it is a little bit telling maybe about how some of his own personal politics has shifted. But that's all just kind of my observation from, 30,000 feet away. Obviously, I have no connection to Mark Zuckerberg at all. So, but I think that is an interesting thing to note in this conversation. And yeah, I think always erring on the side of free speech is better. And if that's just for self-preservation, honestly, at the end of the day, I don't really care what the motivation is.
Right.
Obviously, I want it to be,
yeah.
yeah, I want it to be ideological, because if it's ideological, then it's going to stick longer, right? There's not going to be a change when the tide of culture shifts, if it's ideological. But if it's just for self-preservation, at least maybe for 4 years, we'll get a celebration of free speech. And I think that's a good thing.
Final thoughts on this one, Billy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the jury's still out, but I agree with you, Trey. It doesn't really matter what's motivating it. I do think, I think it's pretty remarkable for a company to admit that they've been doing this when everybody kind of felt gaslit this entire time,
Yeah.
especially conservatives and certain Christian ministries. They felt like, our content isn't going anywhere. Nobody's seeing it. What's going on? And they're sort of being told, oh, you're making it up. It's a persecution complex. And now to have it sort of be told like, hey, you know what? This was happening. I think it does erode some trust, while at the same time offering a path to hope that maybe there'll be some equilibrium when it comes to the ability to get messages out from different perspectives.
Yeah.
I think, too, just real quick, Dan, that this kind of goes back to the point I made about Donald Trump having the bully pulpit and really knowing how to wield that sometimes in really effective ways. And I think maybe this is an example of that, right? He's not even in the presidency. He's not actually putting pen to paper and making executive decisions or wielding any authority officially as president on Capitol Hill. But he's still, just with the way that he speaks, the way that he interacts with people, he's already kind of, we're seeing changes culturally come into play. So it's interesting to see that he's not even president yet, and he kind of is the acting president, really.
Yeah, there are a lot of things happening right now, and that's undeniable. It's undeniable to see that there are at least some temporary changes. We'll see if they stick or not. Appreciate you bringing that one to the podcast today, Billy, and we're going to move on over to the main thing now. And on a recent episode of Faith versus Culture, Trey and Billy spoke with Communio's J.P. DeGance about how to view marriage from a biblical perspective and how to approach dating from a godly perspective. Portion of that conversation is today's main thing.
JP, one of the big questions that comes to mind whenever we're having the conversation about marriage is how to engage in it from a compassionate vantage point, and understand that there are people in different phases of life coming at it in different areas. Because I think often the conversation can turn to, I'm shaming this young person for not being married yet, right? And there are people, Christians, who fall into two different camps. People who think, I'm never going to get married just because I can't find the right partner. I mean, I'm 32 and just getting married, and that's like, in Christian years, it seems like I'm 50 years old sometimes, because Christians are supposed to be married so young. That's the conversation we often have. And then there are others who feel completely content as a single person in the ministry work that they're doing, whatever it is they're doing. So how do we have the conversation of realizing there are people in different phases of life, but also marriage is a sacred thing that God ordained, and it has a purpose, obviously, to procreate and to fill the earth. So how do we have those, or how do we carry those two things together?
Yeah, I think it's critical for the local church to be practical. Okay, I think one of the best ways to engage compassionately in this area is with this. We need to stop assuming that our young people actually have been formed by our culture and by our families to be able to pursue marriage well and to know how to discern marriage well. Right? We have to stop assuming that. So nobody, we live in a very different age and era as a consequence. The smartphone, social media, the ubiquitous of dating apps, there's just so much more that our young people have to contend with, men and women, okay? And so I coach a high school homeschool football team, okay? A bunch of evangelical families, and it's really a great joy. And I lead devotionals with the team and get very practical with the boys about talking to them. They're in high school, right? They range in age from 14 to 18, and I'm able to share with them in a practical way what leads to most frequently to happiness. Okay, on average, the happiest people in our country are married people with kids. Okay, our young people need to know some of the data around it, but then on a practical basis, what does it look like to date and discern a relationship well, right? I co-wrote a book with my friend Dr. John Van App, Endgame, the Church's Strategic Move to Save Faith and Family in America, and in there we have his five dimensions of human attachment. Okay, how dating, how we bond, and those five dimensions are: if you imagine a soundboard, know, trust, commit. No trust, rely, commit, touch. Okay, they're just different sound levels if you think about it. In our society, we want to move to touch immediately, right to the top. You move that knob all the way to the top, and then we ask the question: why do you feel betrayed, or why do you feel like the way that you do when you move so quickly to sexual touch, right? So we actually should progress naturally through an engagement where we get to know the person. We don't trust them more than we know them. We don't rely on them more than we trust them. We don't commit to them. This is a big challenge for a lot of Christian couples, is they almost pretend to be married way too soon. They're committed at a point much sooner than they should be, right? And you never move to sexual touch before before marriage, right? Those points. And so there's ways that the local church can both teach it in a practical way, the skills to discern, are you a better version of yourself or a worse version of yourself when you're dating that person? Okay. And I tell, so one, it's certainly being practical. It's also encouraging our young people to be intentional about our relationships. We're not telling you need to get married at 22 or 23, although it's a perfectly healthy and normal age to get married. The key is, don't dismiss the idea of a committed relationship. Right? There's a lot of people who get this idea in their mind: I'm too young to get married at 24. That is not historically true. Okay, that's not been true in human history. It has been true in our recent history. Okay, anywhere between the age of 24 and 26 is a super normal time historically for folks to get married. So it's the posture of helping folks know that they should prioritize in their life, be intentional, right? It means you got to meet somebody else who's a fit, right? And then on a practical basis, I think I share it with people. We all have lists. People come up with a list of the things that are the non-negotiables that you need to have. It's important to know what you're looking for. But frequently, I think I share with the boys, share with others. I had my own list, and I thought exactly what I was looking for in my future spouse. And then I met my wife, and she didn't have most of those things that I thought were important. And thank God for it. She was strong in areas that I was weak, and she made me more than who I was, right? And so both men and women today, we take a very consumer approach to dating, where we've got this long list. We swipe to the right, we look for somebody else, we treat the other person as a consumable good rather than an end in of themselves. I think this is a great opportunity. This moment is a great opportunity for the local church to speak life into a dead part of our culture, to provide real practical know-how grounded in the unchanging truths of the gospel that will lead our young people to making decisions that are going to increase the likelihood of their own happiness. Okay, and of course, just as you said, Trey, we're not looking. It's encouragement and not judgment. It's giving people the tools and the know-how. I've never had somebody criticize our remarks for being judgmental. It's empowering to know the how to do this and get the encouragement to be able to do this.
You know, when you look at some of what you mentioned before, the church, the fact that so many churches are not currently doing this work, you're encouraging them to do that, and what you just said, and you look at the stats of where we are with marriage in this country right now, how confident are you that the tide can be turned around? You know, talk a little bit about that hope.
Yeah. So first off, 66%, 2/3 of Gen Z say that they're excited about the idea of getting married. Okay. We've got a lot of raw material to still work with. The United States is, while church attendance is on the decline, it has the highest levels of faith practice of any developed country, really, and in certainly large and developed country. And so the church is still incredibly relevant to so many people's lives, right? And God's hardwired us for this, right? We're not trying to get people to do something that goes against our nature, right? We badly want to love and to be loved, right? We don't know how to do it, and our culture is constantly feeding us this idea that actually career and acquiring all this stuff and all these experiences and all these things is what's really important, what will lead to happiness. And that's actually not true. On average, these things are good things. Career is a good thing. Advanced degrees are good things, okay? But they're lesser things, right? These are lesser things than what God has planned for us.
All right, appreciate that conversation there, and considering just how critical marriage and family, how they both are to just society and culture and our ultimate human flourishing. It is an important conversation to have. So glad we had some of that. You can check out the full conversation, by the way, on the CBN News YouTube channel. All right, we got time for one last thing on the podcast today. Going to take a look at Romans 6:6-7. For we know that our old self was crucified with him so that the body ruled by sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves to sin, because anyone who has died has been set free from sin. So just a reminder that while we still sin on this side of eternity, we have been freed from the power of it. We've been made new, and we should have new desires. And now, so even though we'll still sin, because that's still pervasive here in this world until Christ returns, we know that we can overcome that being slave to sin.
Yeah, this idea that sin is controlling us, right, is something that we want to work against. We don't want to be controlled by sin. So that's one of the most powerful and poignant verses, honestly, on the topic.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, the fact that we still will sin, that shouldn't be a discouragement to wanting to be more like Christ, because as we strive to become more like Christ, we move further into sanctification, and it becomes easier to resist sin the longer we're in relationship with Jesus.
Absolutely. All right. It's a great spot to leave it on today's episode of the Quick Start Podcast. We're so glad you're here. As always, make sure you're getting on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. And Lord willing, and that creek don't rise up on us. We'll be back here tomorrow with more. And until then, hope you enjoy the rest of your day. God bless. See you tomorrow.